Now, if you've ever even played Clash Royale, you probably hate the Mega Knight. It's the most just brain rot, no skilled card in the game. And it's been through a lot of nerfs, but it's still broken to this day. This video is the history of Clash Royale's most hated card. Let's watch it.
Mega Knight is literally ruining the game. Mega Knight is stupid, overpowered, and requires no skill. Mega Knight removes all fun from this game. Needs to be nerfed. Today, we're going to be talking about maybe the most controversial and hated card in all of Clash Royale's history. In all my time playing this game, I've seen complaints about tons of different cards, but nothing could even compare to the level of hate I've seen this one card receive. A card with more health than a Lava Hound, more spawn damage than a Royal Delivery, while dealing splash damage on every hit, combined with a very frustrating jump mechanic.
Okay, so keep in mind, at the recording of this video was 2 years ago, but like, it's still broken.
Has led to years upon years of community outrage. So today we're going to be looking at the Mega Knight's journey throughout the history of Clash Royale, its impact on the Clash Royale landscape, and why it has remained as the most hated card for so many years.
This is gonna be a good video.
Mega Knight was released into the game exclusively to players who could unlock it through the special challenge on August 25th, 2017.
I remember this challenge. They did the same thing for the Electro Wizard.
The thing that the community was talking about was whether or not the Mega Knight was actually the builder from Clash of Clans, since the builder had actually left Clash of Clans only weeks prior and was still missing. This was
That's lore. It does look like the builder. He has the same eyes.
Interesting theory, and there are certainly some similarities.
Dude!
But it was confirmed just days later that the Mega Knight was in fact not the builder.
Oh.
Now, in 2017, each challenge for a newly released
It's a cover-up.
card worked a little differently. The way this challenge worked is that you would need to build a deck around the Mega Knight, meaning
Yep, I remember this, dude.
100% of players would have the card. There were no other gimmicks, no draft, just build a deck around the Mega Knight. Now, I've played Clash Royale for a long time, and I can confidently say that this was probably the most miserable challenge I have ever played in Clash Royale history. And it's not just because everyone had Mega Knight. Challenges were just much harder back in 2017. First of all, it was a 12-win challenge, unlike most challenges today that are only 8 to 10 wins. There was no Pass Royale, or any way to reset losses.
Yep.
If you lost 3 times, you were out of the challenge and had to start all the way at 0. Most people were using a Mega Knight P.E.K.K.A combo, which meant in the majority of matches, both players had very defensive decks and no real win condition, ultimately leading to a lot of stalemates, and often matches ended in draws.
Dude, so this was the crazy thing about Clash Royale before, like the OG Clash players know, but before there was tiebreakers, most games, especially against good players, would end in ties.
Was no tiebreaker back then, so it was fairly common to go multiple matches in a row without gaining a win or a loss.
Yep.
This challenge was the only way to play Mega Knight originally, and it highlighted one major problem for this type of challenge. If you know everyone has a card, you're going to build your deck specifically around countering that one card, which in turn is going to encourage players to not play the new card as much. After this challenge was over, only the players skilled or rich enough to beat the challenge had the card. If you didn't win the challenge, you could spend 4,900 gems for a chest that had a high but not guaranteed chance of getting the card.
Oh, that literally reminds me of like FIFA. That's a $50 chest, basically. I don't know about 50, but that's a expensive chest.
In that one.
2 weeks after the challenge began, everyone could finally unlock it, and over the coming months, the floodgates would be unlocked. There are no grand challenge stats from this time, but there are top ladder stats and other ways we can see how Mega Knight was impacting the game.
Oh, you can see the stats?
In the August 2017 season, when the Mega Knight was only available in the game for the last 9 days of the season exclusively for players who could beat the challenge, it appeared in nearly 12% of the top ladder finishing decks. It was popular in these 2 cycle decks as well as a giant elixir pump deck. And the giant deck was actually the most popular Mega Knight deck for that season. Since Mega Knight wasn't really a win condition, the Mega Knight was basically a support card for this giant deck. And it was apparent soon into the Mega Knight's lifespan that it had an impeccable...
Bro, I always think to this day, the most broken combination with the Mega Knight was the skeleton barrel, dude. Because, like, he would just tank, and then you would just put it behind, and, like, it's an air unit, and the Mega Knight's a ground unit, so, like, they would need an answer for both. I always thought, like, Mega Knight, skeleton barrel, bats, like, Goblin Gang, that deck was the most broken Mega Knight deck.
Synergy with the Bandit. Part of this reason was simply because of a glitch that occurred when playing these two cards together. If the Mega Knight and Bandit jumped and dashed towards the tower at the same time, the Bandit would usually make it there first, and then the Mega Knight would push the Bandit back off the tower. This would lead to an infinite loop of the Bandit dashing
oh my
the tower
god,
was distracted or the Mega Knight was dead.
Dude, I remember this glitch!
Even though the distance was much less than the minimum dash initiation rate. Apparently, it was also possible for the Mega Knight to be the one to infinitely jump rather than the Bandit to infinitely dash.
That's
but I didn't
so
find a single
broken.
instance of this actually occurring, likely because the Mega Knight's mass was so high that it couldn't really be pushed off the tower. Now let's look at the meta in the September 2017 season, since that's the first full month the Mega Knight was released and it was finally released to everybody. In September 2017, Mega Knight was appearing in a whopping 21% of all finished.
1 out of every 5 decks had a Mega Knight in it in 2017. Holy brain rot. And that's counting like Goblin Arena, where they don't even have it yet, right?
Decks. The same 3.
Oh, thanks, Havas. This is a peak video.
Popular decks from the last season were the top finishing decks once again, but this time the Mega Knight Hog.
Okay, this deck right here was like similar to the deck that I got the 20-win challenge with. I don't think it had Mega Knight in it though. It had, I think, Battle Ram?
Hog Rider deck was the most popular Mega Knight deck, with the Giant one being the least popular of the 3. The most popular Mega Knight deck this season was actually the 3rd most popular deck in the game overall, just under Golem Beatdown and Log Bait. This month appeared to be the Mega Knight's peak, as by October 2017, it fell back down to about a 14% use rate in top 200.
That's still
again,
insane.
And the card would remain to hover around this area.
Oh, it said top 200. Okay. So 21% of all of the top 200 decks had a Mega Knight in it. Which, like, obviously top 200 players are only going to use, like, the most meta shit ever.
Likely was in part due to the Mega Knight Bandit glitch finally being patched this month. In December 2017, though, a big shift in the meta would occur. This was due to the release of the Royal Ghost. The Royal Ghost was one of the strongest cards released, I would say, in all of Clash Royale history. The Skeleton Barrel also, which had been added only—
Here we go. I knew he was going to talk about this. This was the most broken combo with the Mega Knight, was the Skeleton Barrel.
A little over a month before the Ghost received a huge buff, giving it death damage and knockback, ultimately making it a very powerful card in the meta. The Mega Knight found great synergy with both of these cards, leading to this deck being the most used deck in top.
This was the deck, bro. This was the deck. I would fucking throw my phone at a wall playing against this deck.
Ladder in December 2017.
My Ice Golem, like, this is why I had Ice Golem in my deck. Like, Ice Golem literally carried me in this matchup because of the Skeleton Barrel and the bats.
Ladder in December 2017. Despite this really popular deck, the Mega Knight's overall use rate didn't see a massive increase. You might be wondering how the community felt about Mega Knight overall at the time. By the end of 2017, the Mega Knight had been out for 4 full months with no balance changes besides that bug fix in October.
4 months without a single nerf? I mean, good God. What?
This version of the Mega Knight is objectively much more powerful than the one we see today, so why wasn't this card getting nerfed yet? Well, from discussion I could find about this card, even early on, there was already a pretty massive divide on the card's strength. It seems like a lot of people believed this card was perfectly balanced, when only some believed this card to be too strong. There didn't seem to be a lot of outcry against this card. At least no more than you'd see against something like Hog Rider or Royal Giant.
Bro, here's the thing. If you are new to Clash Royale and you think the Mega Knight's broken now, you haven't seen anything. Like, when in 2017, he was game breaking.
Unlocking and leveling up legendaries at the time was super difficult, meaning most players couldn't level up their Mega Knight easily like they could with Royal Giant or Hog Rider. The Mega Knight was actually considered to be a very balanced card after it came out, but the further in the future each Mega Knight thread I found was, it seemed like the complaints of Mega Knight were slowly growing. People were slowly getting their Mega Knight leveled up, and its usage rate in mid-ladder had been steadily increasing over time. By February 2018, the people complaining about Mega Knight had grown so much that it could no longer be ignored. The majority of people weren't claiming it was balanced anymore, with many people conceding that the card needed at least a small nerf. It's funny because sometimes when I think about the Mega Knight's release, I think it may have been meant as a hard counter.
Look at what the Fireball just did to him, by the way. This is a 4 elixir spell. Look at how much damage it did.
Mega Knight's release.
We're talking like probably 5% HP. I'm not even trolling.
I think it may have been meant as a hard counter to the Elite Barbarians, which were another very popular mid-ladder card.
Dude, these used to be broken. No, these used to be at one point in time. This was the era that I played. These used to be the best card in the game for like a period of time. These were broken. Type a me in the chat if you played back when these were broken.
Card that was one of the most hated cards in the game for a while. Elite Barbarians were still one of the most hated cards in the game, even if by now they weren't great in competitive play. So I wonder if the Mega Knight was added specifically as counterplay for the Elite Barbarians.
Yeah, it did counter them.
By this point, it was clear that the Mega Knight did not clear mid-ladder toxicity, but rather held it under new management. On February 12, 2018, the Mega Knight would receive its first nerf. You might think that it would receive a small nerf considering it had been considered a fairly balanced card for a while, but this card ended up getting one of the harshest nerfs a card has ever received in the history of Clash Royale. Both his jump and spawn damage was reduced by a whopping 25%.
Damn.
This caused many interaction changes. The bigger ones included no longer being able to fully counter a Hog Rider by itself, as well as no longer being able to kill Fireballees with just its spawn damage and one hit. The spawn damage also could no longer kill Zappies. Nerfing his spawn and jump damage so heavily was insanely rough for this card because it was the main thing it had going for it. Its normal damage wasn't what Mega Knight was used for, and if this nerf wasn't enough, his spawn radius would also be decreased from 2.5 tiles to 2.2 tiles.
Wow!
Now, when you take a card that was considered to be balanced by top ladder players and nerf it this much, you can probably guess what the result is. In top ladder play, the card dropped from a 17% usage rate to a 0% usage rate.
Zero?
The card was basically dead on a competitive level and considered useless to many players. But what's interesting is that this card did not phase out of the game entirely.
See, that's the thing, bro. Oh my god, Bren Chong. I remember this guy, bro. This is so, like, nostalgic. Yeah, Clash with Ash. Bren Chong would always put together the gigantic tournaments. I remember that. But, back to what I was saying. The thing about the Mega Knight that was actually broken was if you're a free-to-play player, like, if you were a free-to-play player, you could not level up your Mega Knight. So, like, you would be sitting there with, like, because you couldn't use the Mega Knight. You're not going to use a level 2 Mega Knight when your opponents are going to have a level 4 Mega Knight. So the problem was people just spent so much money on their Mega Knights that they were just able to muscle people in lower arenas, and that still happens to this day.
Everybody says the nerf to Mega Knight was way overboard and it killed the card. However, the win and use rates would speak otherwise, especially on ladders.
This card's rates on ladder were actually okay. It seems like at this point the card was turning into a mid-ladder menace, a term used for a card that is purposely kept underpowered because it will thrive in the mid-ladder environment regardless and too toxic, especially when over-leveled. However, legendaries have always been treated a little differently in Clash Royale history, as they have always been kept viable and quickly buff if they fell out of the meta, with very rare exception. Also, there didn't seem to be much complaining about the Mega Knight anymore, which is a big reason why Supercell does balance cards in the first place. Never underestimate the community's influence. So a few months after this devastating nerf, in June 2018, the Mega Knight would receive 2 buffs, one on June 4th and the other on June 20th. On June 4th, his spawn and jump damage was increased by 23%.
So they brought him right back to before?
Quite a full restoration of his former
A 2% difference?
spawn and jump damage, but it was just enough so that his spawn damage could kill Zappies once again. But this buff would come at the cost of his damage output, which would be reduced by 7.5%.
Okay.
On June 20th, his minimum jump range would go from 4 tiles to 3.5 tiles, which is a buff because this means he would jump more often rather than walk, which is exactly what you want your Mega Knight to do.
Wow.
This was an overall consistency change because Supercell wanted every card to initiate at 3.5 tiles. This buff was not the only thing that would impact the Mega Knight's viability in the meta though, because on the same day as this minimum range buff, the Royal Hogs would be introduced into Clash Royale. This introduced a win condition that Mega Knight was practically perfect at countering. However, even after both of these buffs, the Mega Knight really didn't see any competitive play. And Royal Hogs landing soft into the game didn't help the Mega Knight either. But even with Royal Hogs eventually getting buffed and becoming a relatively strong card, Mega Knight was still considered a dead card to many players. It had a couple tiny peaks thanks to the Royal Hogs, but it was nothing crazy. It really goes to show how bad a card is when it's not even used that much, even when the win condition it hard counters is meta. Even though its jump damage was almost entirely reverted, it was easier to counter now because of the damage nerf with cards like Knight and Bandit, which could fully counter it just by themselves. It was pretty easy to get defensive value out of this card, but without much offensive value, it sat as a below average card. The Mega Knight just didn't have enough value an expensive card like him needs. There were a lot of people by this point actually rather upset that this card just wasn't getting the buffs it desperately needed.
I was so sad they dethroned him with that big nerf? Take a shower! You were sad the Mega Knight got nerfed? You disgust me!
So finally, on November 5th, 2018, the Mega Knight would get an interesting buff, making its hit speed go from 1.8 seconds to 1.7 seconds and a first hit attack speed decrease from 0.6 seconds to 0.5 seconds. The main interaction this changed was that the Knight could no longer fully counter.
And then he gets a jump, yeah.
This is exactly what this card needed because this rate of how fast this card attacked really didn't matter on defense.
Yep.
If you were using that card on defense, you were really using it for that enter the arena ability. Otherwise, there were dozens of better options, especially if you're willing to spend 7 elixir for it. But even after this buff, this card still had stats that showed it to be a below average card. However, this buff sparked something massive for the Mega Knight. Mega Knight had certainly had its fair share of complaints in the past, but up until now, I wouldn't say it was much more complained about than most other cards were complained about in their past. So how much of a difference could a 0.1 second hit speed change really make? I looked extensively through multiple different websites, threads, and comment sections from March 2018 all the way up until right before this card's buff and found virtually no complaints about the Mega Knight. And if there was one, it didn't get any traction and people would just clown on the person making the comment. Mega Knight was just never hated as much as other hated cards at the time. However, when I did the same search, but this time starting from November 2018 through the following months, the results were overwhelmingly different. I started to find tons of people complaining about the Mega Knight, some of these posts getting thousands of likes. In this period of the game, it was clear that the community hated the Mega Knight. It was probably the most hated card in the game at this point. It's important to know though that this was not a unanimous community consensus because on any one of these posts, you'd see a ton of people on the opposing side saying that Mega Knight wasn't even that good of a card and it was relatively easy to counter. At a competitive level, this was true. A win rate in the low 40s is below average, and Supercell has stated that the minimum goal a card should have is 45%, with the game average being 50%. The community was very split over this card and what the future should have been for it, so Supercell left it alone for a while. But the complaints did not stop. Eventually, in July 2019, Supercell actually buffed the Mega Knight once again, giving it a range increase from 1 tile to 1.2 tiles. This is because they were simplifying ranges for all melee cards, so now every melee...
Bro, but I think I think this guy's right with everything he's saying, but I think the thing he's missing is the reason why the Mega Knight is so hated is it's not because it's some insanely broken, game-destroying card. Like, yeah, at one point it was. The reason why it's hated is because you just put it down. Like, there's no brain cells that are required. Like, if you see a big group of troops crossing your bridge, you just put down the Mega Knight, and then you now have to turn into a defensive god to make sure that the Mega Knight doesn't absolutely eviscerate your tower by, like, kiting it or, like, distracting it. Like, the reason is, like, most casual players, like, aren't going to be that good at kiting a Mega Knight or something. That's why the card is hated, because it's just so easy to use.
Card had to have either a 0.8, 1.2, or 1.6 tile range, with 1 being right in the middle of 0.8 and 1.2. Supercell had to choose whether they wanted to give the Mega Knight a slight buff or a slight nerf. Giving such a massively hated card even a slight buff seems like it would cause even more outrage. But since so many other cards were getting changed as well, and since this was being done for simplicity purposes, on top of the Mega Knight already not being that good in competitive play, Supercell pushed him in the direction of a buff, and nobody said anything about it. Good sly work, Supercell. It didn't really make a difference anyway, according to the statistics. Now, you might think Supercell after a few months would give this card some sort of additional change or rework because of all the complaints it was still getting. But after this July 2019 change, Supercell was done. Yes, done with the Mega Knight. It would receive no more changes, nothing for the rest of 2019. In August of 2019, we had a brief period where the P.E.K.K.A was OP, which obviously hurt the Mega Knight.
Dude, this is the dumbest animation that you can get with a P.E.K.K.A. This will never change. Look at where the hog is. Look at where the hog is. 95% of other Clash troops would have to walk down to hit the hog, not the P.E.K.K.A.
The P.E.K.K.A was OP.
Buzz alright. Like, that animation is so dumb.
Which obviously hurt the Mega Knight. But then later in the year, we also had an OP Fisherman, OP Execution. OP Witch,
Had an OP Fisherman, or we still have an OP Fisherman?
OP Night Witch, OP Wall Breakers, and OP Elixir Golem. So I think there was definitely some distraction from the Mega Knight because the second half of 2019 was basically the era of balance changes designed by a Reddit user. But there were also no Mega Knight changes in 2020, and nothing in 2021 either, other than a few bug fixes. However, the use and win rate were actually still growing in competitive play. By January 22nd, 2020, the card had amassed to a 17% use rate and a 52% win rate in grand challenges, which are the stats of a very strong card. If not—
Wait, what was that stat? 17% use rate? 52% win? That's insane.
Rate in grand challenges, which are the stats of a very strong card, if not a little too strong. This surge was caused by the rise of wall breakers, which had been buffed only months earlier. This deck specifically was trending in January, being the most popular Mega Knight deck in the game. However, this card did settle back down to about an 8 to 11% use rate with a win rate of around 43 to 49%, which is actually about as average as a card can get. Most people in high ladder or competitive play considered this card to be perfectly balanced. It certainly wasn't useless and it had decent counterplay, but the complaints of this card only grew and grew over the years, and this was likely due to the Mega Knight's ladder use rate being a whopping 20%. Over the years, with trade tokens, Pass Royale, and magic items, it just got much easier to level up legendaries, making a lot more mid-ladder—
Wait, can you still trade? Wait, did they get rid of this? This was so good. Why do I feel like they got rid of this? Yes? Oh, thank God. Yes? Okay. Ken is gonna spread you apart? I'm not gonna lose to Ken. Okay, chat, that was a quick question.
Easier to level up legendaries, making a lot more mid-ladder players easily upgrade their Mega Knights. But why do players choose to focus their resources on Mega Knight of all cards? The reason people choose to upgrade cards like Mega Knight is because the mechanics of a card like Mega Knight just appeal to newer players more.
Like, yes, that's the thing. The best way to describe Mega Knight is a really bad player can be really good with a Mega Knight. If you give a really bad player Expo, he's going to be terrible. If you give a really bad player Hog 2.6, he's going to be terrible, maybe mediocre at best. If you give a really bad player Log Bait, he's probably going to be terrible / mediocre at best. If you give a really bad player Mega Knight, he'll be decent. Because it's like just mechanics like this. A 5-year-old can drop a Mega Knight into a Witch, Ice Wizard, Wizard, and like the amount of pressure that he puts out onto the opponents makes you have to like become a defensive warlord, especially if you have one of those decks where it's like you don't have Ice Spirit, Skeletons, Knight, which a lot of decks don't, and you have to like be really reactive with your defense. That's the reason why he's the most hated card in the game.
It's really that simple. These types of cards are easier and more satisfying to play, so even though this card was seen a normal amount in competitive play, it was seen in 1/5 of all ladder decks, much higher than the intended amount of usage for a healthy card. Mega Knight also just—
Wait a minute. The intended usage of a card is 7 to 9%. The Mega Knight's ladder usage is 20. That's 3x the intended usage rate.
The mid to lower areas of the game being a completely different environment than high ladder and tournament standard play. Wizard, Witch, and Elite Barbarians have much higher use rates on ladder than competitive play, calling for a higher demand for Mega Knight since it counters all 3 of these cards so well. And one thing that drives people to hate a card in Clash Royale is repetitiveness. People don't want to verse the same thing over and over again, even if they're winning against it in some of the games. Mega Knight players became pretty much a joke to the community because of how over-glorified he was. More seasoned players just couldn't understand why this card was being complained about so much, and mid-ladder players just couldn't understand how people could consider this card to be balanced. There was a huge disconnect, hence the card's history of controversy. The card had gone 2.5 full years with no changes, and a lot of players didn't like this card in the state it was in. So now let's head into 2022 to see what action Supercell would take against this controversial card. In February 2022, Supercell said in a Q&A that they were considering changing the Mega Knight that year and explained their hesitation due to its popularity and controversy. Only 2 months later—
What did they say? What did Supercell say? 1557. This is the most replayed part? Hold on.
Months later, in April 2022, Supercell would officially change the
Oh wait, I skipped by it again. I'm stupid.
2022, Supercell would officially change— In February 2022, Supercell said in a Q&A that they were considering changing the Mega Knight that year and explained their hesitation due to its—
but we want to be careful since it's a super
Popularity and
popular legendary card.
controversy.
Bro, why do you think it's popular, Supercell? It's popular because people with 85 IQs just love dropping it at the fucking bridge. That's why it's popular.
Only 2 months later, in April 2022, Supercell would officially change the Mega Knight for the first time in years. They nerfed the Mega Knight's spawn damage once again by a whopping 20%. This made it have even less spawn damage than it had when they took away 25% of its original spawn damage back in 2018, making it the lowest ever. This is the thing that killed the card in the first place, and now they were doing it again? Interestingly enough though, they didn't touch the jump damage, ruining the consistency that it had had for its entire lifespan. But nerfing the spawn damage back to basically its February 2018 state, where the card was perhaps in its worst state ever, just seemed like the wrong move to me.
Yeah.
I know its other stats were different than they were in 2018, but this card is practically built around its spawn damage. And yeah, Supercell opted to nerf the spawn damage for this reason. They didn't want this card to be built around the spawn damage alone because it was the most frustrating aspect of the card. But I think they should have buffed its offensive capabilities if they were going to drastically nerf its defensive capabilities, because this was a huge nerf for a card that was considered competitively balanced. According to the statistics, this nerf was a drastic hit to the card in competitive play, as you can see the comparison here. It didn't even lower the use rate in general ladder. Since the use rate stayed virtually the same, that means what likely happened was that the Mega Knight players continued to play Mega Knight but dropped some trophies since it wasn't as effective anymore, which will end up terrorizing a lower section of ladder. This makes perfect sense. Mid-ladder players don't have the privilege of simply switching to a different deck if their deck gets nerfed because they've already invested.
Yeah, so this is the big thing that, like, I don't think, like, pay-to-win players understand. And, like, yes, I spend money on Clash Royale now. When I was a kid, I did not spend a dime on Clash Royale. Like, I did not spend I probably spent, in 5 years of, like, high school and middle school, I probably spent, like, $200 on the game in 5 years. The thing that people don't understand is when you are a free-to-play player, you are normally committing everything you have to one deck. Because especially in old Clash Royale, when it was impossible to level up cards, like if you're a free-to-play player, you are committing every dime that you spend on the game to one deck. So if that deck undergoes like a nerf, you are cooked. Like you are literally cooked. That's why most free-to-play players will use like unnerfable decks, like Hog 2.6 or something. Like if you're a free-to-play player, bro, you can't use something stupid like Mega Knight, because what if the Mega Knight gets severely nerfed? Then you're just cooked, you know?
The resources into one specific deck.
But that's the dumb thing when people are always like, oh, try this deck. Like I'll see people telling like free to play players to try all these decks. It's like, bro, you can't, like, people can't afford to try a new deck every day, bro. Like that's not how the game is built.
Nerf was one of the worst ways to going about solving the problem of Mega Knight. To me, it just seems sad Supercell was willing to kill a balanced card for the sake of mid-ladder players. I really didn't want this card to suffer the same fate as Wizard or Witch. This card needed a small rework, if anything, definitely not a nerf, let alone another 20% spawn damage nerf. Would this really be the Mega Knight's destiny? Nothing but a mid-ladder menace for all eternity? 4 months after this nerf, on August 2nd, 2022, the Mega Knight would get the last change it has ever received to this day. His charging time went from 1.1 seconds to 0.9 seconds, making him able to jump faster. I probably would not have gone this route, but at least they were trying something. Part of me thinks Supercell knew the Mega Knight was going to be bad after the April nerf, and this buff was pre-planned, but they wanted a break from the complaints for a while and to give mid-ladder players a break from the card. If it was the plan, it certainly didn't work. So what's happened in the last 6 months since the August change? Well, right after this change, the Mega Knight ended up floating back up to its pre-April 2022 rates. However, when the Phoenix came out in October 2022, the Mega Knight took quite a hit because the Mega Knight didn't work well in a Phoenix-dominated meta. With each bi-monthly Phoenix nerf though, the Mega Knight's use and win rate is easing up back to where it was for the majority of its lifetime. And nowadays, as of March 2023, it's actually being used in nearly a quarter of all ladder decks, which is higher than any previous ladder stat I could find in its entire history, even—
Wait, so in 2023, it's being used more than ever?
though it's doing worse statistically in competitive play than it was before April 2022. And I think if there's not a massive meta shift, the use rate on ladder will only continue to grow. But with the spawn damage being nerfed, it should at least be a little less frustrating to go against. I'm sure you 5500 trophy warriors can answer that one for me. I don't really know. Personally, I've never really hated the Mega Knight. I always thought he was a fair card to go against in any stage he's ever been in. Although in his OG state, he may have only been kept in check due to the surplus of Inferno Tower at the time. I definitely would not rank this card as being one of the most overpowered cards in Clash Royale during its peak. And if it was up to me, I would actually revert him back to his pre-April 2022 state, because I feel like most players grow out of their Mega Knight hatred eventually, and I do think he was more balanced in that state. But for the sake of the overall state of the game for the majority of players, it's probably best to not go too overboard with this card. Mega Knight players are just in a different mindset than the rest of the Clash Royale player base sometimes. Maybe Supercell can sneak in a rework by distracting everyone with an insane Goblin Giant buff or something. But getting back to the topic, the community is still divided over the Mega Knight to this day, and it's likely to stay that way.
Yeah.
Some cards are just like that.
Guess what, bro? 2025, same way, dude.
I hope this video gives everyone a good idea on why the Mega Knight is the way it is, regardless of your relationship with the card. Let me know your
This was a beautiful video. I'm gonna let it finish, though.
thoughts on the Mega Knight in the comments below. I'm always interested in hearing more perspectives. Just please don't comment Mega Knight Spirit. And just remember, if this video could teach you one thing, it's that if you complain for long enough, Supercell will give you whatever you want.
Okay, this was a beautiful video. Now, my closing take on all of this is I would say, yeah, like you said, the Mega Knight will never be like the most broken card in the game. Like, sure, at first, probably like 2017. But like, the reason why the people hate the Mega Knight is because of how people just hate low skill cards. Like, that's what players hate. So there's two factors that go into why it's so hated. It's because it's a low skill card, and it's because it's a legendary. So only like pay to win players can max out a Mega Knight, to be honest, bro. Like that's the reality of the situation. Like if you're trying to max out a bunch of common cards, it's gonna be a lot easier than maxing out a legendary card. So like obviously Clash Royale's different now with leveling, but like I remember when I was a kid and I played, you had to spend money to max out a legendary, or you literally had to play like 8 hours a day and grind every challenge, and those were your only two options. That's why he's broken. Or not broken, most hated. But that was a beautiful video.